Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Simmons. As Andy said, I'm the Member of Parliament for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, and I am a member of the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fear of financial services, which is the host today. Should just explain, an all-party parliamentary group is not a formal parliamentary committee. You may see the televised proceedings of some of those committees, but it's where a group of members of Parliament with an interest in an issue that affects their constituents come and work together on that issue. And this all-party parliamentary group often takes evidence and picks up issues and takes those to the Financial Conduct Authority or to parts of government with a view to changing policy or seeking redress for people. So whilst parliamentary select committees, for example, cannot take up individual cases, the purpose of this is to gather evidence so that we can address the issue at heart today, which is the activities of the Phillips Trust Corporation and the activities of like businesses and how it's affected people across the country. The main focus for the all-party parliamentary group is the behaviour of financial services providers, and then perhaps secondarily, the conduct of their regulators, the Financial Conduct Authority. In my own case, the Trust Corporation, the Phillips Trust Corporation, was brought to my attention firstly because of some family experience where relations were introduced through a building society to what initially appeared to be a will writing service that then led on to setting up a trust that would have caused them a great deal of difficulty and significant financial cost had it ever been put into effect, and required considerable legal fees to unwind it before the deaths of one of those family members, which would have activated it and created a situation. And following that, it became clear to me I had a number of constituents, and following research, it became clear a number of colleagues had significant numbers of constituents who were affected by similar types of situations. So as a result, we decided it was appropriate to begin some investigations, and I'd like in particular to say thank you to Andy, who you've just heard from, and to Mark Bishop, who some of you will see on your screen, and their colleagues and acquaintances who've been doing a great deal of work through research with questionnaires to people who are affected, to provide a bedrock of what are the common issues about how people were treated, how can we identify the lines of inquiry that as members of Parliament we may then take forward with the government and with the Financial Conduct Authority, and to put together the evidence session today so we had a fair idea of what it was that affected people, and we're able then to gather some of the human stories to back that up, to make the case for the Financial Conduct Authority that much stronger. So what we're going to seek to do today, just remind everybody, as Andy said, the session is being recorded, is we're going to put these sessions, put this evidence together so that we can then share with the FCA how the conduct of the Phillips Trust Corporation and the connected parties has impacted on people's lives. And it's important for me to be clear that as parliamentarians, we can ask questions, we can publicise issues, we can hold government to account. We're not in a position to compel the FCA to do a particular thing, to follow a particular course of action. But what we can do, and we've had some success in the past, is demonstrate that this issue is sufficiently serious that they need to act. So it is very much something that's a team effort. A couple of housekeeping points. I have to ask, please, that people don't make their own recording of the session, and that's simply because everybody here has their own very personal story to tell. Some of those are about very personal, family, private issues. So that everyone can feel confident to speak freely, please can we be clear that the only audience for the evidence that's gathered today will be the Financial Conduct Authority. It's also important to say that this session is only for those affected by the Phillips Trust Corporation and the related entities. And of course, the all-party parliamentary movement. So I would ask if there's anybody who's on the call who is not one of those affected parties, this is the appropriate moment to step away. And in particular, if we have parties, solicitors, for example, acting for any of those organisations, claims management companies, that sort of thing, then I'd ask you please to just step off the call at this point, because it isn't appropriate to be present for the remainder of the discussion. Now, many of the people who are on the call, and I can see lots of people on the screen I know will have great contributions to make, kindly completed questionnaire which was sent out in advance. Those responses have all been looked through, And it's very clear from the work that's been done by Andy, Mark and others that some very significant patterns have emerged and some questions which we're aiming to pick up on today's session so that we can build that evidence in a structured way. Effectively, what we think is we're seeing in those patterns is that building societies had introduced companies to the will writing company, the family trust corporation, or both, and that people had not been treated fairly in that process because they'd ended up with receiving a service that was inappropriate for them, and that they'd been referred to that service by a regulated financial body. Now, to date, the narrative from the FCA has been that building societies acted purely as introducers and that would not have known, could not have envisaged about what would happen next. Now, clearly, the evidence in the questionnaire suggests that that's not the case, that not only were those organisations both owned by the estate planning group, which suggests that it was clear from the outset that people may well have been referred, but in many cases, and certainly in the case of my own family member, the building society introduction was specifically for the setting up of a trust. That was the purpose for which the introduction was made, and that took place in a building society and was witnessed by a building society member of staff. So we also know that building societies said these are execution-only arrangements. Now, personally speaking, as someone who is by background a qualified financial advisor, I understand the significance and the implications of that. But it's very clear from the evidence in those questionnaires that there's been a high level of implied endorsement, a degree of pressure sometimes on customers from employees of building societies, and even financial services, financial advisors employed by the societies perhaps recommending and making those introductions. So it's very clear that the connections are very significant. The FCA to date has also said that building societies could not have foreseen that clients would end up being handed over from the Family Trust Corporation to the Phillips Trust Corporation. But again, we have seen a thread of testimony running through the questionnaires that shows that the two were effectively the same organisation. So it looks as though there's very strong connections there, and that really builds the case for further FCA action. It also seems that arrangements continued for quite a long period of time, certainly for some years, and we would expect that responsible organisations would be monitoring what was happening to their clients after introductions had been made to ensure that what was being done was appropriate and was safe, and that the feedback from their customers was correct. So during today's session, what we're going to do, led by Andy, who has got an idea of who's here with particular stories to tell, we'll be running through the questions that were sent out to help people to tell that story to the FCA, and in particular looking to build the evidence that helps us address the points, the rebuttal, the defence that's come back from the FCA in respect of building societies, so that we can demonstrate, for example, if there are specific and provable allegations that the building society knew that you as an individual or a member of your family would be getting or had got a family trust, that the introduction to the will writing company or family trust corporation came with a level of endorsement, perhaps a recommendation from the building society, and that they knew the family trust corporation had a one-off business model, or that they misrepresented in some way the handover between it and the Phillips Trust Corporation. The clearer we can be about the human and financial consequences, the better. And I'm again aware from that family experience how significant that was, not just in tax that might have had to be paid by bereaved people, but also the long-term implications for home ownership and other connected matters. And I've heard lots of examples of similar types of stories from other people. So Andy Agathaglu and Mark Bishop, who are here from the Transparency Task Force, will participate in the dialogue and help to structure it. Peter Grant, my colleague who's the Member of Parliament for Glen Rothes, will take over chairing the meeting around 1 p.m. I'm aware it's quite a long session, but what we're hoping is that with the structure, we'll be able to use the time effectively to give everybody the opportunity to tell the story that they have and to produce from it the evidence that we need to encourage the FCA to take further action. Peter, like me, is another Member of Parliament with a real interest in getting action on financial services misconduct and regulatory issues. And I know he's been following this case for some time. Just concluding my opening remarks, I'd like to say thank you to the Transparency Task Force for putting the event together, and the Action Group, Phillips Trust Corporation, and the administrators of it, Kroll, for publicising it so that people who may have been affected by the actions of that organisation are able to come here today and to participate. And just to be clear, although sometimes people think members of Parliament can provide legal advice, we as an all-party parliamentary group and individual MPs can't provide that advice, but we can certainly help you in bringing to the attention of the relevant authorities the action that you might be able to take. And it would be really helpful when you speak, if you'd be willing to say what your name is and which building society you were a customer of. And the reason for that is it makes it a lot easier for the FCA to understand which society your evidence is about, and also enables us to identify groups of people who may be affected and come back to you with any queries. So I hope that sounds like what people were expecting to do today, and a good use of time, that from today we will emerge with a serious piece of evidence that will encourage the FCA into action. So at this point, I think I'm going to hand back to Andy, who's going to start with the opening questions, and I look forward to hearing stories that you have to tell, and to hopefully being able to support you in getting appropriate redress in due course from the responsible bodies.
David, thank you very, very much indeed. I think you've set the scene superbly. You really have. You've already talked about some of the issues that are no doubt going to be surfacing during the course of this session. My role today is essentially to try to sort of stage, manage and organise things. I'll do that to the very best of my ability. We've got a slide deck that we're going to be using. I'll be making reference to that as we go through, to give us a bit of structure and to kind of remind us about what some of the questions are, so on and so forth. But in all honesty, the most important thing today is to, where possible, take the opportunity to tell how particular questions resonate with you, especially if there's something you're very, very keen to say, perhaps, for example, because it's over and above what might have been in the actual questionnaire itself. Okay, so some introductions. We've already heard from David. I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm proud to be the chair of the Secretariat Committee to the All-Party Parliamentary Group. My day job, as it were, is running a campaign organisation called the Transparency Task Force, which is a certified social enterprise with a mission to help to get the financial sector to behave responsibly and fairly and transparently and trustworthily, etc., etc. We'll also have Bob Blackman, MP, with us. Bob, could you please take the opportunity to introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Andy. I'm Bob Blackman, MP. I'm the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for, well, we started off as pension scams, and then we've migrated to be looking at personal finance and fairer banking. Obviously, the concern I think that all of us has, and I thank my colleague David Simmons for agreeing to chair this evidence session, is that we are in the position whereby we are getting more and more concerns about the FCA and their reluctance to investigate one of the areas that we have been pushing very strongly. As Andy and others will know on this call, we've been pressing the FCA on a number of areas to investigate the activities of different financial institutions. This is one of the areas where clearly there's an argument about whether the FCA has a duty or not, but we would, I think, all strongly argue they have a duty to investigate this and put pressure. And as David quite rightly said during his introduction, it's very important that we gather the evidence so that we can demonstrate the multitudinal element of this, that it's not just an isolated case. This is, in many cases, a coordinated use of the potential contact with customers to unfairly end up with very difficult circumstances for people on a personal level. I mean, I've had several approaches, to do similar things to what David was talking about during the opening comments, and so I welcome the evidence. Unfortunately, because of parliamentary duties I've got, I won't be able to be with you for more than till 1 o'clock. But I know this session is going to last for quite some time, and I look forward to reviewing the evidence that is gathered as a result of the presentation. Thank you.
Bob, thank you not only for being here today, but also for chairing the APPG in such a proactive and effective way. It's great that we have so many parliamentarians involved with the APPG who really are using up a lot of bandwidth that they don't have to try to represent the interests of ordinary people throughout the UK. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Grant, please do the same. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. And then we'll go to Claire, then to Andrea, then to Ian, then to Alexander, then to Mark. But first of all, Peter, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Just very briefly, I'm Peter Grant. I'm Member of Parliament for Glenrothes in Fife. I'm one of the Vice Chairs of the APPG. I've worked with Andy and the Transparency Task Force trying to disentangle far too many instances where my constituents have lost money through pension schemes, investment schemes, funeral plans, and a number of others. And the first time I spoke to Andy about this one, my first comment to him was, that sounds like a very similar way of operating to the Safe Hands funeral plans collapse. And I then did some checking up and discovered that the same person was involved with both companies. So it really can sometimes be a very small world. As far as I know, I don't have any constituents that have been affected by this one, but I do know that for every person that's contacted me directly about being involved in a particular scheme such as this, when I start putting out on Facebook asking people to come forward, there's half a dozen others will contact me then. So I'm quite sure I've got something out in my social media just now. I'm quite sure that I will find that I've got constituents who either they or sort of close relatives have been caught up in this appalling affair. Like Bob, I'm not able to stay for the full meeting. I'm going to be dropping off in a few minutes, so I'll stay connected, but with my camera off for about half an hour because I've got other stuff I need to do, but I will be in for the latter part of the meeting, and I've told David that I'll sort of stay on as host if David needs to go later on, so don't take it as personal when I turn the camera off in a few minutes time. I won't be in my office for a wee while, but I will be back on quite soon.
Peter, thank you very, very much indeed. Claire Springle, please take the opportunity to introduce yourself, Claire. We've only known Claire for a matter of a few weeks, but it's very, very clear that Claire's been putting a huge amount of effort along with her colleagues into these issues. And from what we can see, she's been doing an absolutely first-class job. Claire, please say hello. Thank you.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity to listen to what everyone has to say today. I'm a solicitor and I've been qualified for over 20 years, specialising in this particular area of work, mainly wills, probate and trusts along the way. That's mainly because for many people, trusts just aren't appropriate. So although I advise on them, very few people ever really go ahead with them. So my job has really been to see what position clients are in, see what we can do about it to extract themselves from the trust corporation, either bringing trust to an end or appointing family members to continue the trusts. And for some clients, that's been easier than it has for others, just because of personal circumstances. So most people have a similar story to tell from the introduction from their local building society. So I'm really interested to listen to what everyone has to say today, as I'm sure their stories will be very similar to all of the clients that I've dealt with previously.
Claire, thank you very much, Claire, and your colleague Heather beside you. Let's go to Andrea, who I think many of you will already be very familiar with. Andrea, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea. Oh, sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, okay, great. Hi, I'm Andrea. I actually didn't set up the Facebook group. That was actually Ian, who's on the site and who we're all really grateful for. But I probably have been badgering people to get their questionnaires in and sign up for the Zoom meeting. So I make no apologies on that. I am, however, a member of the Creditors Committee for the Administrators Kroll. And that's it, really. And also just thanks to everybody for setting up the meeting.
Andrea, thank you. Mr. Ian Nightingale.
Hi, everyone. So obviously from sort of now, it's over a year since the Facebook group was set up. And I set it up originally because my parents were in the same situation as so many people on this call, that they went to their building society, they trusted, and were told there was a scheme going that they were offering, and they entered into this. Now, subsequently found out that people were going on Trustpilot, leaving bad reviews, but it was a one-way traffic. And so I set the group up to give people a voice. And I think it's tremendous that how many people are now members of the group, and that we've got to where we are today. And so it's great that the MPs have put their time in, and then Andy and Mark, you've sort of made this happen for us. So yeah, you obviously hear so many stories throughout the morning. And, you know, I honestly feel one of the things that the building societies are still doing is giving their clients and family of the clients the runaround in the hope that, you know, they'll die or the parents will die and there won't be an issue to answer. So I think, you know, the more pressure we keep up on this particular issue with the building societies, the better it's going to be.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you. We're now going to hear from my colleague Alexandra Zitkus, who has been working so hard in the last week or two on this whole meeting. So Alexandra, please take the moment to briefly introduce yourself and let everybody know roughly how many questionnaires we've had supplied already. Alexandra, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Zitkus. As Andy said, I work with him at Transparency Task Force as the head of events and fundraising, and I'm also a member of the Secretariat. And yes, like Andy said, I've just been helping with the admin of planning this meeting. And I think so far we've received about 140 questionnaires and counting. There'll be more, obviously. I'm currently processing them. So thank you very much for sending them in.
Thanks, Alexandra. And Mark Bishop. Mark.
Hi, my name is Mark Bishop. I volunteer for Transparency Task Force, mostly in the area of strategy and policy. I've run an action group for people who are victims of a different financial services misconduct case, namely Connaught, for the past nearly 11 years. And during that time, I've worked with people who run many of these kind of action groups to share really information, expertise, and kind of empathy with each other. And that's how I came to be involved in Transparency Task Force. For my sins, I think I've read every one of the questionnaires that's come in yet that's been processed by Alexandra. And so my role mostly will be, as we run through the questions, I'll be trying to steer the debate in the particular directions that may be where we need more information from you, more clarity from you, more testimony, in order to help us to make the case to the FCA, firstly to investigate, and secondly, we hope, to persuade the building societies to compensate those who've lost out.
Mark, thank you very much indeed.